To really get the genius of William Wordsworth, you first have to understand the world he was born into, a world he basically blew apart. Imagine poetry as this really stuffy, exclusive club. It's got all these strict rules, super fancy language, and the only people on the guest list are like gods and nobles. Well, Wordsworth was about to crash that party, and believe me, he was going to change everything. Okay, so check this out. This really shows you the two worlds colliding. Over on the left, that's the poetry of the 18th century. It's formal, it's elaborate, and it is obsessed with classical myths and high society. But then, on the right, that's Wordsworth's revolution. He's using everyday language to talk about the lives and, more importantly, the feelings of regular, common people. This wasn't just a new style, you see. It was a whole new reason for poetry to even exist. But a revolution this big doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. Wordsworth's new vision, his new way of seeing the world, it was really forged in the extremes of his youth. The absolutely breathtaking beauty of England's Lake District and the deep, deep pain of personal loss. And this timeline, wow, it just lays it all out. On the one hand, he's growing up surrounded by this incredible wild beauty. But on the other, he experiences just devastating loss, losing both of his parents by the time he's 13. And that combination, that's everything. Nature becomes his comfort, his guide, his muse, and all that grief gave him this profound emotional depth that would become the very heart of his poetry. And then came France. As a young man, he gets a front row seat to the French Revolution. At first, he's totally electrified by the ideals. Liberty, equality for all. But then he watches in horror as it all descends into the bloodshed and violence of the Reign of Terror. This conflict, this pole between his ideals and the brutal reality he saw, it would stick with him and shape his work for decades. So this whole experience left him with this burning question that would pretty much define his entire career. How do you take all that tragedy, all that chaos and turmoil, and turn it into art? How do you make something that not only gives it meaning, but maybe, just maybe, can also heal? His search for an answer, well, that's what led to a literary revolution. And that brings us to the breakthrough moment. And it's really a story about the incredible power of friendship. See, Wordsworth didn't find his new voice all by himself. It was his collaboration with another absolutely brilliant poet, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, that really lit the fuse for the entire Romantic movement. The year is 1798, and this is it. This is the moment everything changes. Wordsworth and Coleridge put out this small, kind of unassuming little book of poems. It's called Lyrical Ballads. And it might not have looked like much, but let me tell you, it was a quiet bombshell. It was a manifesto for a whole new way of writing. So what was so radical about lyrical ballads? I mean, look at this. Instead of writing about gods and kings, the poems were about simple, rural people. Instead of that formal, complicated language, they used the direct, plain speech you'd hear from any common person. And the focus shifted from these grand historical events to the inner world, to emotion, to memory, to our connection with nature. It was nothing short of the democratization of poetry. And, we absolutely can't talk about this period without mentioning the quiet force working behind the scenes. His sister, Dorothy Wordsworth. She wasn't just a cheerleader, she was a true creative partner. Her journals were filled with these incredibly sharp, detailed observations of the natural world, and they basically provided the raw material and the spark for so many of his most famous poems, including I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. But Lyrical Ballads was so much more than just a book of poems. It was the blueprint for a powerful, new philosophy. This wasn't just about changing the style of poetry, it was about changing its very soul. This quote right here, this is the key that unlocks everything about Wordsworth. He believed that real poetry starts with a powerful, spontaneous feeling. But, and this is the crucial part, the actual writing happens later, in a moment of calm, quiet reflection when the poet remembers that original emotion and gives it a new form. It's a process that's both raw and refined, totally emotional, and deeply intellectual, all at once. And here's that process broken down perfectly. It starts with a real experience, something that hits you hard. Then you let it sit. You give it time. That's the tranquil recollection. And finally, you have the creative act of turning that remembered emotion into poetry. And that's his secret sauce, right? That's why his poems feel so personal and yet so universal. They're born from real emotion, but they're shaped by thoughtful contemplation. So these were the pillars of his whole philosophy. He believed that nature wasn't just a pretty backdrop, but that it was a spiritual and moral teacher. That childhood holds this special kind of wisdom that we tend to lose as we grow up. That our memories have this incredible power to comfort and to heal us. And that the stories of ordinary people are just as worthy of great art as the stories of kings. I mean, for his time, these ideas were truly out there. And this revolution, it wasn't just some flash in the pan. The changes Wordsworth kicked off would ripple through the decades, permanently changing the course of English poetry and really changing how we think about art, about nature, and about ourselves. And here's the best part, the ultimate irony. In 1843, the poet laureateship, the ultimate symbol of the literary establishment, was given to the very man who had once been its biggest rebel. It was like a formal admission from the old guard that, yep, his revolution had won. He was now the standard-bearer for English poetry. His influence is just massive. He directly inspired that next wave of romantic poets, like Keats and Shelley. He completely humanized poetry, making it a space for looking inward, for exploring personal feelings. And you can even draw a straight line from his reverence for the natural world to our modern environmental movement. He taught us to see nature not as a thing to be used or conquered, but as something to connect with on a deep, spiritual level. Which leaves us with a pretty powerful question for our own time, doesn't it? Wordsworth's great insight was that we find real meaning, real peace, by connecting with the natural world and with our own inner lives. So in this age of endless digital noise and constant distraction, maybe his call for tranquil recollection isn't just a fancy literary idea. Maybe it's an essential practice for finding a little sanity and a little centeredness in our own lives.